Callisto Protocol. The hype surrounding this game was palpable before launch, to say the least. It was one of my most anticipated games of 2022, and it was the case for a lot of people. But then the game came out, and people were definitely disappointed. It wasn't like the worst game that's ever come out or anything. I personally had more positive-leaning mixed feelings towards it, but it certainly didn't live up to the anticipation surrounding the game. The meta score is sitting at a 69, nice, and the user score is sitting at a 68. It is agreed upon that this game has enough issues that it cannot be held in the highest regard. Though I do think there is enough of an interesting foundation there where if they extrapolate on it more and if they can refine things more, you can make a really great next entry. I really hope there's a sequel to this game personally. I do think there's potential for this IP, but the likelihood of a sequel has been diminished by the fact that, well, the game has not sold particularly well. The following information was reported by Korean news outlet K Odyssey, and here's a headline that paints a grim picture for the future of the Callisto Protocol IP. Krafton's 200 billion won, not dollars, won, paid new game sluggish. Securities companies lowering target stock prices. Scrolling down, it is once again reiterated that Callisto Protocol, which was released last month, back in December of 2022, cost about 200 billion won over 3 years to make. Translated into dollars, for those who don't know, that's around $160 million, which is definitely up there in terms of AAA game budgets. And based on analysis from securities firms like Daishin Securities, Samsung Securities, Shinhan Securities, Kiwoom Securities, Korea Investment and Securities, and Hyundai Motor Securities, the sales that they've been seeing surrounding the game don't seem to indicate a positive profit outcome for this venture, and so they've lowered their target stock prices of Krafton from last month to early this month. The main reason being the failure, they call it, of Callisto Protocol. One of the securities firms, Samsung Securities, stated that the expectation was for Callisto Protocol to sell around 5 million copies total in its lifetime, but considering the current sales ranking, cumulative sales of 2 million copies will not be easy until this year. They're saying that 2 million copies is the most optimistic outcome for Callisto Protocol, which, when you consider that number, that's actually a pretty good number for a brand new sci-fi horror IP, but because of the amount of money that Krafton spent on this particular project and just the amount of money that it didn't make back, the 2 million figure, even though it's considered a positive figure by many's standards, when it comes to the financial prospects and the profit margins, it's going to ultimately end up not meeting the lofty expectations set for this game. Just to give you some context, to reach $160 million, to break even on the amount of money that they spent on this game, they'd have to sell at $70 price point roughly 2.3 million units, and that's without taking into consideration the, say, 30% that platforms are owed. Taking that into consideration, we'll be looking at figures closer to 3.3 million units to achieve $160 million worth of revenue. So to make a good amount of money from Callisto Protocol, 4 to 5 million units sold would be the ideal outcome, but apparently, that's nowhere close to the figures that we're going to see out of Callisto Protocol's total sales. Another securities firm, Korea Investment and Securities, lowered its cumulative sales estimate from 4 million to 2.1 million, not too different from what Samsung Securities said here. And they lowered its operating profit estimate from 813 billion won to 629.3 billion won. That's the operating profit estimate for Krafton as a whole for this year. So 813 billion won to 629.3 billion won. That's in US dollars, lowering the estimate from $654 million to $506 million. They lowered the estimate by roughly $150 million for this year, which, yeah, that's rough. That's solely based on Callisto Protocol's commercial failure. Commercial failure in the eyes of the corporations who invested a certain amount of money and expected a certain amount of return. The article then makes it a point to highlight all of the factors that contributed to the lower sales. Gamers' reviews are negative. Although graphics and sound technology are excellent, the length of the game is too short to be cleared in about 7 to 8 hours, and the stage formation is also simple. It's not just a commercial flop, but critically, it didn't do particularly well either. And for me, the length of the game wasn't the biggest issue. I do agree that the level design was overly simplistic. There were no puzzles to mix things up. It was going from point A to point B, killing a bunch of monsters, loot some stuff, and then go from point B to point C, rinse and repeat. And the game was very linear as well, which didn't help the lack of puzzles or just something to mix up the gameplay loop. Enemy variety was extremely lacking. It felt like you were basically fighting the same enemies from beginning to end. And the final boss, there was a lot of frustration around that. The dodge mechanic also had mixed reception because instead of having a dedicated dodge button, the way you dodge is essentially by moving from left to right, and it wasn't even timing based. You essentially could hold left and right, and game would just auto-dodge, but sometimes the auto-dodge would be finicky. Really, the most impressive aspect of Callisto Protocol is just how gorgeous it looks and how great it sounds. But in terms of how well it plays and how compelling it is to immerse yourself in this game, that's where things get a little rough. For me, there are many aspects to combat that I did enjoy. I did like the challenge that the game offered. I did like the powers, and I think shooting overall felt good. I liked the quick shot mechanic and stuff like that. But there were definitely a lot of things surrounding the core mechanics in terms of level design, enemy variety, and all these things that ultimately culminated in a game that was ultimately too underdeveloped and didn't fully realize its full potential, which is why I'm hoping for a sequel, but again, the prospects for that are looking less and less likely. They also note that on Steam, the reception has been overall mixed, and if you go to Steam right now, you will see indeed that this is true. While recent reviews have been slightly more positive at a 69%, nice. Overall reviews are sitting indeed at a 61%, and that's from 20,000 reviews. That's a good amount of players who have decided to give their input on this game, and the general agreement is that this game is kind of mid. On Metacritic, the lower than expected critic scores are pretty similar across all platforms, 70% on Xbox, 69% on PlayStation, and 68% on PC. The article then makes it a point to highlight that the reason Callisto Protocol is considered a commercial failure, even though it is estimated to have sold roughly 2 million copies, is because of the sheer amount of money spent on production, the significant amount of money spent on production, around $160 million, money that cannot be made back unless this becomes a major hit. And apparently the cost to make this game could be higher if you include the marketing costs conducted at Krafton's headquarters. With that in mind, the cost from game production to release is expected to be greater. Now, Callisto Protocol is going to see additional updates and content in the near future. There are plans to update the game with new game modes and character costumes on the 7th of next month, and there are plans for a paid DLC release, some kind of expansion, to serve as an addition to the core campaign for additional content that players can enjoy. But this article aptly highlights that gamers are generally skeptical because it is rare that single-player-only games which received negative reviews in the early stages have rebounded with additional content or DLC releases. It'd be one thing if this game got Witcher 3 levels of reception at launch from critics and users alike, then people would be salivating for more content. But now seeing how mixed the reception surrounding this game has been, and for those who have played this game, having experienced what is overall pretty mid-game, negative or positive leaning depending on who you ask. Additional content for Callisto Protocol is hardly something that's going to garner a whole lot of hype from the gaming community unless they overhaul the foundation of the game so that it plays a whole lot better, but such an overhaul is unlikely to happen. What people would maybe look forward to is a full-fledged sequel where they really drastically improve upon all of the flaws of the first game. That's when people might give it a second chance, but with a current foundation, the DLC is essentially just going to extrapolate on what is still a rocky foundation. So, yeah, we'll see if that's going to be enough to make the game see some kind of rebound as Krafton would like to see, or that's how the article phrases it. To me, that seems unlikely unless this expansion, this DLC, whatever it might be, really blows us away. Now, Krafton itself hasn't released official results surrounding Callisto Protocol, but we are expected to see exact numbers in Krafton's fourth quarter earnings announcement to be announced next month. So soon enough, we'll get exact figures and see just how dire things are for Callisto Protocol, which spent way too much money for the returns that they got. Again, I hope there's a sequel, but that kind of future might be uncertain given the commercial failure of this product. But I guess only time will tell what the future holds for Callisto Protocol and whether it's an IP that Krafton is willing to give a second chance to. But until then, let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on the latest reports surrounding Callisto Protocol's commercial performance, whether you think there's a future for this IP, and whether you'd personally like to see a sequel, whether you had a good enough time with Callisto Protocol or see enough potential in the IP that you'd like to see future iterations of it, or do you think it's better to just lay it to rest? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.